morning. This edition of Agenda comes to you from the Global Men Engage Conference, where delegates from across the world and India have gathered together to talk about getting men, boys involved in gender justice. We have activist Rahul Bose here with us, and we're going to talk about some of the findings of the survey that has been done. It's a UN-backed survey which looks specifically at a lot of male respondents, and the revelations from that survey are quite surprising. Take a look at that, and after that we come and talk about why the male perspective into crime against women is so very important. Take a look.
The study by International Center for Research on Women and United Nations Population Fund has found that 35% women have experienced emotional violence, including threats, insults, and intimidation from their partners. In the study that covered 7 states across India, 17% women admitted to being sexually abused by their husbands' partners. 15% women say they have been economically abused by their husbands' partners. The story of female feticide has been widely reported, but respondents in the survey showed that more women than men believed that a woman's most important role is to produce a son. In fact, for 67% men as opposed to 47% women, sex of the child didn't matter. Men and women who wanted sons in the survey were older, less literate, poorer, more likely to live in rural setting. And why did they want a son? The reasons ranged from lineage, old age support to the belief that they will share the workload. And we may think the laws prevent sex determination tests, but half of the men and women surveyed said they were unaware of laws prohibiting sex determination. 1/3 men and women surveyed believed that the law should allow couples without sons to have sex selection. The primary reason to have daughters to ensure enough women for men to marry. Bureau Report, NDTV.
So as we talk about men engaging men in the fight against violence against women, it's interesting to note that this Independence Day, the Prime Minister also actually made a change by talking to our sons, how it's more important, and that role in gender justice is what we're talking about. Our panel over here, as we look at those startling figures of the UN survey, we have Priya Hingorani, Supreme Court lawyer, Rahul Bose, as I said, the Ravi Verma, who is, of course, one of the authors of this survey, Abhijit Das as well, and of course a lot of people here who are going to share their story with us. But first, the first talking point that we're looking at is, why is the male take so important? Why do you think it is?
Well, I think it's very simple. If you're going to be looking at dismantling patriarchy, then you have to get men to buy into this. But the deepest root of this is control and power. And to cede control and to give away power can only happen to a generation of boys and men who actually grew up without it, who understand that real relationships are when you do things together, as opposed to imposing your power over somebody else. This is a very fundamental shift that needs to be done. But it needs to happen literally from when kids are kids. And as I was saying in my speech earlier.
What was interesting in your speech, while everyone's talking about, a lot of delegates over here telling their stories, and what Rahul Bose did was he told a story of how the orientation came very different, and your orientation, as you shared with the delegates there, was seeing your father being the more caregiver and being the person in the kitchen.
Yeah, my mom never cooked. My father always cooked, and he made our lunch boxes and gave us oil massages, and my mother pushed me to play rugby, to box, and it was quite a role reversal. So when I went out into the world outside, I kept thinking, why are my friends' mothers in the kitchen? Are their fathers ill? You know? But this entire very natural way of showing a boy how it could be versus telling a boy that you must do this and you mustn't do this was how I grew up. And that's why I say that it's very, very important now to start when in the family, when the boys are young, but not to tell them anything, just show them. If a boy sees his father walking 2 steps ahead of his mother as they go to get onto a train or whatever, you can be sure there's a very good chance that that's the way he will treat women in his life.
That's really interesting. And in fact, one of the findings of this survey that has been done is how the respondents found that a lot of women were the ones who were initiating and giving those responses, which we typically expect of the men. In fact, the survey showed that a majority of mothers in a relationship were the ones who were desirous of having the male child. Why is that, Ravi Verma?
Well, I don't think it comes as a surprise because
It doesn't.
It doesn't, because the women are part of the same similar patriarchal arrangement
But
where
the fact
they are
that
endorsed.
they were more than the men?
Well, that varies from one state to another. So it's in some states you find more women preferring sons, and in some states more men. But I would not really put a lot of premium into the difference, these kind of differences. The fact is that, say, almost half men and half women prefer more sons than daughters.
More sons.
Than daughters, and women also, because they are also representing the same patriarchal voice of which they are the product. In fact, they become the custodians of that patriarchy in some ways.
That's really interesting. And actually, we have someone over here in our audience who's sharing their story with us about how the pressures she kind of faces in having a male child. आप बता रही थी हमें कि आपकी 3 बेटियां हैं, 4 बेटियां हैं, तो आप पे किस तरह का दबाव आता है?
मेरी सास भी परेशान करती है, मेरा पति भी परेशान करता है बहुत ज़्यादा। पति भी मारता पीटता है, लड़ाइयाँ करता है, बेटियाँ 4 पैदा करी हैं तुमने, कहाँ से खिलाऊंगा, काम भी नहीं करता है, दारू पीता है, मैं काम करती हूँ, तो उसी से खर्चा पानी चलाती हूँ।
आपको भी अब बेटा चाहिए या फिर आप?
मेरे को ऐसा कोई महसूस नहीं होता कि बेटा ही चाहिए, मेरे को तो बेटी भी बहुत प्यारी है।
बेटियां हैं
तो बेटियों को फेंक थोड़ी दूंगी। सास ने तो जब एक लड़की मेरी बीमार हो गई थी, जब मैंने अर्बन में भर्ती किया था उसको, तो सास तो बोल रही थी इसको छोड़ के चली जाओ।
तो आपको पता है डोमेस्टिक वायलेंस एक कानून है और आप इसके खिलाफ जाके कंप्लेन कर सकती हैं। आपने कभी सोचा है उसके बारे में?
सोचा,
जानकारी नहीं है तो
इतनी जानकारी नहीं, पढ़ी लिखी नहीं हूँ,
तो इसलिए पता नहीं है कि क्या करें।
पता नहीं है मेरे को।
Abhijit, just as an NGO, is this the main problem that most people, we've had this domestic violence law since 2005, we've all celebrated it, but the people who may be affected most may not be aware or don't know how to go about, empowering themselves with it.
You see, certainly in India laws get made, but many of these laws never reach the intended community they are supposed to give benefit to. So that certainly remains an important issue. But with an act like Domestic Violence Act, look at who the gatekeepers are. The gatekeepers are usually the people who have access to information, the access to the news is the men. So if in this case, if a non-literate woman to get this information, maybe clearly there may be a gatekeeping function done by the men. So our intervention is very clearly that any domestic violence is wrong, is actually a crime now in India, and this is going out equally to women and to men, because men are not only men in their families, it's also men in the neighborhood. And if you look at the law like domestic violence, it makes it imperative for people who even know of domestic violence, and they can file a report. So we've been working with men who then become, in a way, the vigilant in the community to see where domestic violence is taking place. So that's where we see.
How many areas would they be working like that?
You see, our work today is in about 1,500 villages in 5 states. So it's not very small.
Okay. And Priya Hingorani, since 2005, we've seen NGOs the problem. We heard her story, and it is really poignant. I mean, do you think that is isolated, or is it, true of most people?
It is true of most people. It is not an isolated case. The biggest problem in our country is actual dissemination of the information, the laws, to the people who actually need it and who need to use it. This is one such case. There are 100 such cases which come to court every day where the women are harassed, newborn babies are killed, female feticide is happening in our country.
Yes.
Domestic violence is an area which, but the other aspect to it is, because it is our Indian society, that most women are scared to come to court, or because of fear of where will they go if they are thrown out of their houses. Because most often if they come to an NGO or they go to the police redressal cell or they go to court, there's no point of no return.
Yes.
So that is one fear which keeps them from coming to the courts. But there are a large number of women and mother-in-laws and sister-in-laws who are using the Domestic Violence Act to come to the court and bring out their grievances.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
You know, I think that the idea of having men supporting women is something that is very rare, especially in the house we see nowadays. But the question is where to start. If men have to join the fight for gender justice, who are these men? And for the last year, I've been listening, and it's been a very trying time, listening and talking to the men around battered, beaten, molested, abused, or raped women. You know, there's a confused father. There's an angry husband. There's even an ashamed son. You can't control these impulses because these men's basic constructs have been unmoored now. How do we face people in the office? How do I walk around the village? To actually look at these men and to start to spend time, months, maybe even years with these men, so that they at some point can be relieved of their pain and understand that what happened has got there's no shame on them, there's no need to be angry, because then they can say, not somebody else's wife, not somebody else's mother, not somebody else's daughter. I believe.
And
this
are
is
you
the
saying
first
that
constituency.
these men were never addressed before this?
Not in an intensive. I mean, now that there's a whole. Abhijit will obviously talk much more about this. The awakening and awareness, but how to approach these men.
Okay.
Because earlier it's a difficult situation.
Yeah.
And it varies from case to case.
Now, before we go into break, I just want to look at the quick, the real disturbing statistic that comes out of this study, which is that 52% men in relationships admit to having abused their partner.
Yes.
Is that has to be very, very startling?
Oh, that's very high. I mean, much higher than.
Is it uniformly across the states?
That also varies, but it's very high across states. It's high, and it's high also because the women respondents in the usual surveys had presented only 40% women saying that I have experienced violence within my relation. Here, 60% men say that I have perpetrated the violence.
Okay.
So there are more men admitting that they perpetrate, and they don't feel. They perhaps think this their prerogative.
Okay.
So that's important piece actually.
Okay, and what we have over here in this delegation, of course, are a lot of people across the world also coming in. We have participants here from Africa. Did you feel that the situation here in India is similar to back home? How so?
Yeah, I think that when you talk about issues of gender inequalities as well as violence, especially against women and girls, it's sort of not necessarily a cultural issue. It's almost everywhere in Africa as well as other parts of the world.
Are you dealing with it in the same way?
No, I think the strategies differ depending on context, obviously. And
Okay.
in most of the countries that we work, there are issues of religion that you have to weave through, even in your own approaches as you're dealing with issues of gender-based violence.
Okay, before we go into a quick break, I just want to introduce some people over here who've been working with auto drivers. Remember why they're important, and what they told me was the reason that they got involved was because in December 16, the paramedic who was murdered and gang raped, she was first refused, the auto driver refused to take her, and that's when you all got involved? So what is the strategy that you are working on?
See, auto is a standalone community. It was very difficult to get through them, and we realized that the Delhi image is linked with the auto wala's image. So
Okay.
we felt that if we can activate his behaviors, make him more gender sensitive, and make autos as a safe space.
No, and they have some very interesting posters and the work that they're doing with the auto walas, and that's part of engaging men in this fight against crime against women. But we'll talk about that in just a bit. Let's take a short break.